We'll start with a roll call, please.
Vice President Bennett Kill.
Here.
Member Chung.
Here.
Member Choke.
Here.
Member Kwolchuk.
Here.
Member Leto.
Here.
Member Nelson.
Here.
President Fay.
Here. And we'll move on to the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay. On August 17th, 2023, the Board of Education reviewed, 2024. August 17th, 2024, the Board of Education reviewed and approved the tentative budget for the 2024-2025 school year as drafted by Dr. Jason Kays, the D57 Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations. In accordance with legal requirements, the Board published the adopted tentative budget, published that the adopted tentative budget would be available for public inspection for a period of not less than 30 days. At this time, the Board of Education wishes to conduct a public hearing for the purpose of presenting the annual school budget and to allow board members and community members to address the board. May I please have a motion to open the public hearing for the 2024-25 annual school budget?
So moved.
Second. Well, no. Okay. At this time, I'd like for Dr. Jason Kays to address the board, please.
Excellent. Thanks so much for having me tonight to talk about our budget for fiscal year 25. So as a reminder, our fiscal year runs from July 1st to June 30th. So this is for the 24-25 school year. And as you know, we've talked about this for now a couple months. The first time we discussed the budget was back in July, which was just an overview of the budget from the previous year, from fiscal year 24, and then a conversation about what we were looking at for fiscal year 25. In August, we approved the tentative budget, and then today we're here to talk about our final budget and approve that. And so I want to start, I always like to have everything start with the strategic plan. And so within our strategic plan, we talk about maintaining balanced district budgets each year. And obviously a lot goes into our budget. We have a lot of different people within the district that oversee budgets that then come to me, and then I oversee all of them. But our budget administrators do an amazing job of working with me when needed, but really of monitoring their accounts that they're in charge of. We work together on developing the budget and then working together on staying within budget whenever possible. So before I jump into the actual budget, just a couple things to talk about. We know that a budget is developed at any given point in time in the year, and so we know that things will change throughout the year. And my job is always to be able to look and identify the needs of the district throughout the year to make sure that we're staying within budget. We do allow for adjustments and flexibility when needed, but really trying to stay within our set budget that is set really tonight. So that budget calendar, and we've talked about, I know before, really begins, we do a lot of different things, but really that budget starts with the board approving the staffing plan and looking at exactly what the staffing plan will look like for the following year. So we start there with budgeting. Throughout the spring, I'm meeting with all of our budget administrators, identifying exactly the needs in the district for the next year in order to start creating that budget. At times, we have to work together to figure out maybe there are things that can't be done this year and need to be done in the following year, but we start developing the budget together and looking at it. I will put in all of our staffing for the next year, as well as anticipated staffing for the next year. Insurance is a big part that we'll put in, and any other increases we know. There are lots of things that are known when we're creating the budget. There are many things we don't know, and so we do have to look at assumptions and look at history in order to understand exactly what we can build within the budget. In July, we discussed the budget assumptions. In August, we approved the tentative budget, and then tonight we're talking about the official budget. Is that okay? just want to make sure I didn't miss a slide there. It must be the next slide. So in our budget, we have all of our accounts broken up into different funds. And so just a reminder of how we do budgeting and accounting here in the district and really in all districts in Illinois. We break everything up into funds. Lots of things come out of our education fund, salaries for most of our teaching staff and education staff, all the supplies, any purchase services, speakers we might bring in for Institute Days, things like that. Operations and maintenance, exactly what it sounds like, is about keeping our buildings running, but it's also about paying, for example, salaries for custodians and our maintenance crew. But it also is about paying companies that are coming in to service our buildings or supplies that we need within our buildings, boilers, things like that. Debt service is us paying any bond payments that we have outstanding. We also, it would be anything where we have a lease. So really it's about the copiers. We have a copier lease that we actually started last July, so a new 5-year lease. So that's in that fund. Transportation's transportation and everything that comes with it. So it's paying for a student for our transportation services. It might be buying Bessie seats for kids to sit in over at Westbrook. So there can be some supplies, but mostly it's paying for a student and some of our other transportation services in order to get kids to where they need to be. We have our retirement system and everything that goes into that within the next fund. Capital projects is a fund that we do utilize. We don't levy for capital projects, so we don't have money that comes directly into capital projects. We always transfer from another fund. The last couple of years, we've been transferring from all of the funds to cover capital projects have come from operations and maintenance, because that's where we have a fund balance that we can move into capital projects. But that's typically the budget that we have for doing some of our large facility needs over the summer. That I mentioned the boiler, which actually comes out of capital, but through operations and maintenance, all the doors that we fixed this summer, all of that work that was done. And then working cash, we do have a levy in there. It's not something that we utilize and spend money out of in working cash, but it is something that is there, and we can transfer it to other funds when needed. So you have in front of you for the board, and there are some copies in the back table. Sorry, I might have missed people that came in early. But on our website, we have an annual budget report that I put together, and so I've updated it for this year. That really just goes through a lot of how our budget works, some data as well that you can see about revenue and expenditures, but we're going to go through it as well tonight. So our revenue, which this chart looks very similar to previous years, we receive a majority of our money through local sources. You can see up there 91.8%. So that is a lot of our revenue that comes through local sources. Of our 100% revenue, about 84% comes from property taxes. So we obviously have other things like fees that are put into local sources as well. We do receive some grants through the state and some grants through federal sources as well, but a majority of it comes through local. You can see in the chart up here what the budget is for revenue. I'll point out just a couple different things. We do anticipate there to be a decrease in our corporate personal property replacement tax. So over the last couple of years, we've received more than we budgeted for in that tax. It is a tough one. I have received some of the estimates for this next year, and so we do assume that next year will be a little bit lower. Interest earnings, same thing. Last year we did receive a lot more. I was very conservative on interest. At the time that we were making the budget last year, interest rates were still pretty far down. It's only 2 years ago that our interest rates were so close to zero, and then obviously this last year they were a lot higher. We do anticipate that they're going down. We all saw some of the news yesterday as well, so you can see that the interest earnings, although the budget is more than last year, it's less than what we received last year, and we will continue to invest our money. We do, it's nice that we have been getting it in a timely manner from Cook County, and so we can invest it better than we had, what was that, two and a half years ago or so. And then just the increase through CPI, just as a reminder, CPI, we are seeing that increase from, that 5% CPI from a couple years ago, but the CPI was actually higher. We just, as a district, have a max of 5%. So, but what that typically tells you is some of those purchase services, some of those supplies might actually go up more than 5%. We can only receive that revenue of 5%. When you look at the expenditure budget, you see that about 3/4, a little less, of our budget goes towards salaries and benefits, and that's pretty typical. It's a little bit lower this year, and the reason for that is our purchase services have gone up. Purchase services mainly in O&M, in our operations and maintenance, so that's what we're paying vendors to help support our buildings from, continuing to run. So whether it's HVAC or roof fixes or some flooding issues that we've had, those are the types of things we're paying companies to come in and fix, and that has gone up over the last couple of years. But last year specifically, we went over budget, not over budget in overall, but over budget in some of those line items. So we did increase those for this year. You can see in this chart, breaks it down by with all the numbers of where we're at. Just to point out a couple things, and they're written on the right there as well. We do, and I talked about the purchase services, so I did talk about that second bullet, but the first bullet, we do continue to see insurance going up. I have looked, we are part of a co-op, so that's helpful because we are a small district. It'd be tough on our own, but I have talked to other people that are outside of our co-op, and we're all seeing typical increases. So it's, this was typical for what they're seeing as well. So I'll continue to always look. We always are looking to see if there's money that can be saved, but right now that's just the cost of the insurance companies. This shows our fund balance, and don't let your eyes jump to the red numbers, although if you're like me, they will. And just in the capital projects, I talked about the fact that we don't levy in capital projects, which is why you see red at the bottom there. But we will transfer at the end of the year from that Fund 20 operations and maintenance to cover that capital project. So don't let that confuse you. And then debt service, we do work. That we actually, that's the paying of the bonds, and so we're fine that we do want to levy exactly what we're paying as much as possible, and so we had a little bit extra in there. So we're fine there. You can see on the top line the estimated beginning fund balance, and so you can see across the top there. And just as a reminder, our goal is to try to keep in our fund balance at the end of a year between 30 and 50%, with a goal of 40%. We're a little bit higher right now, but we do anticipate. We had a couple big years of CPI that now is obviously going down. It's 3.4 the next year, that we'll see taxes. So you can see at the bottom then the estimated ending fund balance as of June 30th. So as of right now, the budget has a surplus of just under $300,000. This is the budget, the same budget that was presented as the tentative budget. We do know that there are changes that happen. I receive changes pretty much every day, either because we hired a staff member that's obviously different than what I assumed, or because we've received an updated contract that we just didn't have that information for, or grant money that we know now that we didn't before. So there are changes that happen. I still think that number is a pretty a good number for where we're at, but we will obviously keep a really close eye on it throughout the year, and you receive updates every month in the board packet. So just a couple of next steps, and this year's just obviously a little different. CFAC will start to begin meeting soon. We are done with the audit from our portion, and we're just waiting for the auditors to provide the final documents, and hope to have them present probably next month. And so as soon as I receive the final documents, I can get that into our program in order to have accurate financial projections, not a budget, because we'll have the accurate numbers from last year. And so then CFAC will start meeting. We'll be looking at 5-year financial projections, but we'll also be including the impact for full-day kindergarten. We know that that legislation is coming, and that we want to make sure that we are prepared, because we know that there is a cost involved in hiring more staff to support that program. The other thing is construction, and I know I think we've talked about this once before, but we typically around this time are talking about what we're going to do next summer. We actually have probably already talked about it, because usually we're a year ahead. We are waiting a little bit just to see what happens after November, and figure out exactly what we'll need to be doing next summer. So I've met with the architects. We have a couple different option plan, but it'll really I'll bring it to you in a couple months, and we'll decide what we want to do looking at next summer. We do have things on our facility plan, the 10-year facility plan, that some things that need to get done, some things that don't necessarily need to get done next summer. So we'll talk through that, and I'll give you some options. That is everything with the budget. I know we've talked about it for a couple months, but that is everything with the budget that I wanted to share. Questions?
Okay, just to reiterate, this is information that we all have seen and talked through quite a bit, so I wouldn't be surprised if, we feel pretty well informed, given everything that we've heard about it so far, but at this time, if there are any questions or comments.
One thing.
Vicki?
Yeah. First, thank you so much, Dr. Kays, for presenting this budget. And exactly like Kim mentioned, yeah, we've seen it a few times. And I know we've said this in the past, but, we really appreciate your conservativeness and giving us a balanced budget year after year. I did just have, just out of curiosity, and I'm just looking at this last slide where you talk about CFAC and thinking about the 5-year financial projections and also thinking about full-day kindergarten in 2027-28 school year. So in the past, and specifically I'm thinking about the COVID years, we had, like, hey, here's different versions of what it could be. And then since then, it's just been one, which made sense. So I don't know if, just as a preview, you're thinking, hey, there's so much uncertainty, perhaps you'll show us 3 or 4 different scenarios, or...
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, my goal is always to give the board what they need. And so I can always do whatever is requested or asked. In the past couple of years, we have talked at CFAC about the fact that I think you can do a lot of different projections. There's so many assumptions, obviously, that we're making. And obviously, the further out you go, the less likely that it'll be accurate. And so the last couple of years, the CFAC committee has decided that we wanted to present one. This year, I'm already thinking that we'll present at least 2, if not more, of just showing for sure this is what it looks like without full-day kindergarten, and this is what we anticipate with the impact in 27-28, and then if there's other factors as well. I know one year there was some factor that we were looking at, so we were looking at 2 different projections. Maybe one only came to the board, but there were 2 that we looked at CFAC. But yes, I was already thinking ahead that we would probably have at least 2. Sure.
Anyone else? Chris?
Just to echo what Vicki said, thank you again, Dr. Kays, for putting this together. It's always very easy to understand, well done, and kudos again on maintaining the balanced budget last year and for projecting one this year as well. So just a couple of questions on CFAC. When do you expect that we will hear from them? Do you know yet? And maybe a follow-up to that or corollary question is, regarding full-day kindergarten, are their projections going to be referendum agnostic? In other words, will they change, or could they change based on the successful passage of the referendum or not? Because I would imagine they would. And so because of that, are we going to wait for those projections until after November? Is that the plan?
So yeah, every year CFAC has presented in January, and I don't see it being different this year. So I think we'll start meeting probably in October, but by our November and December meetings, we'll have an idea of what we're looking at, and so we can share with you exactly what that can look like. It still can be a couple different options depending on where the board then goes after November, depending on the decision. But yeah, the idea is that in January there's financial projections, because in February is the first view of the staffing plan. So I think it helps the board to say, all right, this is what we think the future looks like. Now we know how to address any staffing needs.
And that's great, thank you. And I would just to also piggyback on Vicki's question, I really like the idea of presenting scenarios and maybe showing, how sensitive is the scenario to these factors, right? Sure. Like if CPF ends up being less than what I think you project, was it 2.5% or 3%?
For a CPI? Yeah.
CPI.
That's okay. It's been different numbers, but we usually use an average.
I mean,
of 10
if
years.
that changes, where do we end up?
Sure.
If, it would be good to know how sensitive these projections, and I know they're all projections, I get that, but how sensitive are they to different inputs would be interesting.
Sure, absolutely.
I'm sure CFAC loves putting spreadsheets.
They do. It's hard because you could go a little bit crazy with, like, you could change this one, and there's so many different assumptions, but we can definitely give an idea of what the impact is based on different things like new growth and CPI.
Awesome, thank you.
Sure.
Any other thoughts? Okay. At this time, are there any members of the public who would like to address the board regarding the budget? This is just regarding the budget at this time. Okay. Seeing none, if I can have a motion to close the public hearing, and we'll move on to the rest of our agenda.
So moved.
Second. we'll just say, everyone in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. All opposed? We still want to talk about the numbers? Okay. Okay. Moving on, then we have our board recognition for National Hispanic Heritage Month.
I'd like to take a moment to recognize that from September 15th through October 15th, we celebrate National Hispanic Heritage Month. This commemoration began in 1968 under President Lyndon Johnson and expanded to a full month under President Ronald Reagan in 1988. The choice of September 15th is significant as it marks the anniversary of independence for Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. Additionally, Mexico and Chile celebrate their independence on September 16th and 18th. While the official celebration began decades ago, Hispanic and Latinx people have been shaping American history since long before the U.S. became a nation. Their political, cultural, and societal contributions are deeply woven into the fabric of who we are today. In support of this important celebration, our district's social studies resource, TCI, offers several engaging activities and biographies that can be used in our classrooms. These resources are rich with opportunities to introduce our students to influential figures such as Denise Sandoval, Roberto Clemente, Frida Kahlo, and, pardon me with my glasses, Mario Molina, among many others. Let's take a month to celebrate the richness and diversity within our district and foster meaningful conversations about the important role Hispanic and Latinx people have played in shaping our country.
Thank you very much. And now we have the honor of recognizing several of our staff who have achieved tenure this year. These dedicated professionals have demonstrated exceptional commitment to their students, colleagues, and the educational community. First, I'd like to acknowledge those who cannot be here with us tonight, but whose contributions are no less significant. And those are, I'm just going to say the names, Cindy Buell, Laura Cremascoli, Amanda Fouch, Mandy Tainter, Carolyn Zeffrey, and Sharon Z. We're so happy to acknowledge them in their absence as they achieve tenure, and we're grateful for their hard work and dedication. Now it gives me great pleasure to honor the staff who are able to be here with us tonight. Please join me in celebrating, and I'll say the names, and then should we have everybody come forward? Okay, so as I say your name, if you could please come forward. Carol Benbin. Carol Capra. Laura Giuliano. And Linda Payne. Of course we are. I just want to mention each of these educators has made a lasting impact on their students, and we're so fortunate to have them in our district. So if we could have one more round of applause for their commitment to excellence in education. Thank you. Okay, and we will transition now into our board reports, or rather our communications portion of the agenda. Do we have an NSSEO report?
We do.
I imagine we do. Go
Lots
ahead.
going on at NSSEO, as always. We met on Wednesday, September 4th. We had a special recognition for, just like we just did here, for 16 staff members who were recommended for tenure and approved by the board, which is very cool. Shining stars, always the best part of every NSSEO meeting. There were 7 students from District 211 recognized. These students successfully participated in the Sunrise Lake Outdoor Education Center's New Endeavors program during this past summer's extended school year. New Endeavors' mission is to establish a positive and supportive learning community in which students develop the academic, emotional, and life skills to be successful in life beyond high school. District 211 teaching staff working at Sunrise facilitated the growth of positive peer and adult relationships, appropriate social skills, and the acceptance of personal responsibility for behaviors and choices. Some of the activities the students participated in included cleaning the chicken coops. I'm sure that was fun. They gardened, they kept the walks clear, they moved rocks to borders, restored the edges of the driveway, among other tasks to help keep Sunrise Lake even more beautiful. And for anyone who's been there, you know it is a really amazing facility. These 7 students demonstrated initiative, communicated with teaching staff, practiced flexibility, led with on-time and on-task behaviors, and all with 0 injuries. So a great job by all of them. So it was really nice to see some of them recognized at the meeting. Moving on with the Sunrise Lake theme for the meeting, Brian Bolger presented Sunrise Lake's annual report. Some great news, they are back now to pre-COVID levels in terms of students and visiting staff attendance, which is fantastic news. I know my daughter's class just went there this couple weeks ago and had an amazing time. So it really is a great facility, and it's great to see that they're back kind of at their pre-COVID numbers of groups who are attending, which is great. They're almost completely scheduled for this year. They have a very small waiting list that are looking for specific months that are already full. And they're already taking requests for the 25-26 school year, already accepting some of those. Brian also talked about some longer-term plans. There is actually land just south of Sunrise Lake that they've had their eye on potentially purchasing. They really want to maintain the aesthetic of Sunrise Lake and not have that be bought and developed and really do the opposite of that. So some longer-term options there. There's a house on that property that could be used for life skills development of staff and some other ideas. These are longer-term ideas, but it was great to hear Brian kind of think about what might be possible in the years to come. I'll take this time to mention, since we're talking about Sunrise Lake, that the annual Harvest Fest is Saturday, October 26th from 11 to 3. It's always an amazing time, lots of great activities for kids and adults, so it'd be great to see my fellow board members and the community and their kids there. Always a lot of fun. Dr. Schnur then provided an update on the strategic plan, which you know that NSSEO is going through, to guide and prioritize the work that the co-op will do for the next 5 years. As member districts, our input is being sought in several ways through the consulting firm that we've hired to help facilitate this work, Hazard, Young, and Atia. All member district superintendents are participating, and I think that those have happened already, participating in a superintendent focus group, which is great. I think there were 2 separate sessions for that. Is that right, Dr. Gore? Member district assistant superintendents, directors of special education are participating in focus groups as well, which is great. All NSSEO governing board members are holding or have held one-on-one interviews with HYA as well. HYA will be providing us with an environmental scan in November, which is really a summary of all the information gathered from parent staff surveys, focus groups, other data sources, financial, facility, student data, and really just providing a current state of affairs for the co-op. I will be bringing a brief summary of that environmental scan to our November board meeting. I don't know, forget exactly when that is, but it'll be in November. Each NSSEO member district is asked to invite 3 people, a combination of staff members and board members. to attend 2 full-day meetings in which the plan is actually going to be developed, right? So this work has kind of been gathering information, gathering data, and then the next work will be actually developing the plan. The dates for these 2 meetings are December 3rd and December 10th from 7:30 a.m. to 4 p.m., so full days. It'll be at the discretion of each member district to determine the appropriate attendees for this important meeting. Dr. Schnorr will be speaking with the member district superintendents with additional details to help determine the best participants to represent each district. So I know this is a lot of info, but us participating in this strategic plan process is critical. As one of the member districts, I want to make sure all of you and members of the community who are here or listening are really kept informed and aware of what's going on with the processes, and to make sure that we all keep these important dates in mind, and that we're, most importantly, adequately represented at these strategic planning meetings in December. Any questions on this? I know this is a lot of info to throw out. Everyone okay with this? Okay. Good. And then our next meeting will be Wednesday, October 9th.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Do we have Ed Foundation?
We haven't had a meeting yet, but our first meeting is on Tuesday, the 24th, so next Tuesday. And the fall fundraiser is going to be November 2nd. So definitely put that on your calendar. I believe it's going to be at Station 34. I think that is still, they're still having the conversation, but I believe that is the date and time.
Thank you so much. We'll move on to PTO reports. Let's start with Fairview.
It's going to be fast. I was unable to go. So I will update you at the next meeting on the next meeting.
Okay, sounds good. Lincoln, while we're on that side of the table.
Yes. So Lincoln's last PTO was this meeting was this past Monday, September 16. So first, many thanks to Dr. Gore, who attended the meeting. She kicked it off by talking a little bit, giving some information about the referendum in November and some upcoming town halls that we're having, and answering questions. So thank you, Dr. Gore. Next, the PTO discussed their Helping Hands Fund, which was created to help student and families in need. So as an example, a family could approach one of the social workers at Lincoln and request funds maybe to offset the cost of a PTO event. And then that social worker could go over to the PTO and let them know about the family, and just keeping it really confidential. So the PTO has had this fund for years, but on Monday they commented that it's not they don't receive very many requests for it. So they're going to do an effort to kind of spread the news about it so that families know that it's available. And in addition, they brainstormed about other ways that they can use those funds. So for example, winter coats and hats and scarves in the winter. In addition, during his principal's report, Mr. Larson shared that the year was off to a great start. He commented that there's a lot of new staff at Lincoln, so they're bringing a new energy. He also said that the 6th graders were adjusting well, and that in his recent memory, it was one of the smoothest starts to the year. And finally, he also shared that there's a change in their Principal Advisory Council. They made a change to help make it more accessible to the students. So last year they met after school, but then they found that it often competed with other after-school activities like cross-country or track, you can imagine. So this year they're holding it during lunch in the LRC, so it'll be divided by grade levels. So 6th graders together, 7th and 8th. And they're hoping that this will increase participation and accessibility, so they're looking forward to seeing how that turns out. And their next PTO meeting is Monday, October 21st.
Wonderful, thank you. Westbrook?
Westbrook hasn't met yet. They're going to meet next Tuesday at 7, but I am not able to attend. I'm at a condo board meeting on budgets.
Super fun. We can send out an email to see if somebody can cover for that.
That would be kind.
Sure.
And whoever is covering, I'll give you cookies. I bring cookies.
Sounds good. And then Lions Park.
All right, we met September 9th. Mary also presented on the referendum at the PTO meeting. There was a bunch of conversation about a variety of things that are happening right now. So the PTO has started using and will continue to use Parent Square for all of their communications, and we're really excited about that. And they're looking to switch from Directory Spot next year to Parent Square for all of the directory information. So that will be nice to have everything in one place. The LRC director had a request for digital displays for the entryways to the LRC, on which to display book recommendations, author highlights, promote events, and it would also be a place for the media club at the school to put content in, whether video or just visual. And that was about $3,200 was the request. The PTO is also looking for ways to spend some of their carryover funds they carry over $10,000 from year to year, and looking at ways to either do a legacy gift or some other more significant gift for the school. They've talked about the Gaga pit per the advisory council, the student advisory council, and Mrs. Kelly talked about outdoor learning spaces. This might be being one of the items that we would look at. The Roar and Run, just the biggest fundraiser of the year, the fundraising has started, and they talked about having refreshed obstacles at the run itself, and they will be doing a Spirit Week the week of the Roar and Run. Special lunch starts in October. That is $7 per lunch, and it is, families sign up for 2 months at a time. Also, if there is need for, piggybacking on what Vicki was saying, if there is need for some financial support with that, any families that need it can contact Mrs. Valentino, the social worker at Lions Park. Sorry about that. Let's see. The LRC is requesting volunteers. We've got plenty of space that they need to fill. Principal Kelly talked about the MAP and FastBridge assessment data. They were starting to do some analysis of that to see how the kids have come into the school year. And that safety week had been the previous week. It went well. That's the week when they do all the drills, all the lockdown stuff, and said that the cooperation with the police department and fire department were great. Oh, the next PTO meeting is October 7th at 7 p.m. in the Lions Park staff room.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And then by way of board president report, I just want to remind everybody that we have our board governance meeting, which will take place from 4 to 7 p.m. before the October 17th board meeting. So we somehow always manage to stack it up next to a board meeting, and it makes for quite a long evening. But this is when we'll do our self-evaluation. So we'll come together and think through, how have we worked together this past year? How can we work together, continue to work well together in the coming year? And just by way of preview, I do have a little bit of Robert's Rules type of training that I'm hoping to accomplish that day. So look forward to that. It'll be fun. Hopefully. I'll have fun. I don't know about you guys, but it'll be fun for me. Okay. Now that brings us to community comments. The District 57 Board of Education welcomes community participation. In an effort to both listen to our stakeholders and keep the meeting moving, I want to remind everyone of our public participation procedures and guidelines, which can be found at Board Policy 2:230. Individuals wishing to address the board can do so during the community comments portion of the agenda. Individuals should provide their names and limit their comments to 3 minutes. Please remember, this is not a dialogue between you and the board. The board is in listening mode at this time. Individuals wishing to contact the Board of Education are welcome to do so via the D57 website under the Board of Education tab. Individuals should behave with respect and civility towards others and abide by Board Policy 8:30, visitors to and conduct on school property. At this time, are there any community comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll move into our staff and superintendent reports, beginning with an overview of the Advanced Learner Review.
All right, and Dr. Vonderhaar is going to do an introduction for our guest speaker tonight, who is, we're so excited for you to be with us tonight and give an overview of your report and findings.
Well, thank you so much. We have really enjoyed our partnership with Northwestern University Center for Talent Development, and specifically Melissa Hinshaw and her team. She has been fabulous. She has been great to work with, super thorough. And really the reason we had this advanced learner review, it came out of our equity audit. And for our district equity leadership team, one priority area that came up was looking at our academic data and identifying some discrepancies that were present. When we brought that to our district leadership team, we did some analysis. We also looked at some historical data, but we wanted to do a more thorough investigation of our students and where they were at. So then comes in Melissa, and she is going to talk to you about the very thorough process that she undertook with her team, as well as their findings and recommendations. So following this, we will pull together a committee that will involve staff members as well as community members, and follow a similar process to what we did with DELT. So identifying our key priorities, and then that group will help to determine if we want to dig further into data, if we want to explore different options for things. So following this, we will have that a survey go out asking for participants from the community and staff. So I'm going to turn it over to Melissa.
Okay, thanks. And Mark says this should work and move my slides forward. Is that true? All right. I'm going to back up 1 second. I'm moving forward. Mark, can you back me up to the beginning? Perfect. I just want to say my name is Melissa Henshaw, and I oversee all of the work at the Center for Talent Development, both around our assessment department and our school and family services program. But when we engage in these reviews, I am not a team of one. We are a big team that also includes our associate director, Eric Calvert, and our director, Susan Corwith. And so the three of us take lead on all of these reviews, and we tap into other expertise, especially when we're on site conducting those focus groups that we do and those classroom observations. So I'm excited to be here. I am at the Center for Talent Development, Northwestern University, for those of you who don't know. We do have a goal this evening, and I just want to take a little bit of time to sort of share what this review process looks like from the beginning to the end, what our first impressions and our broad indicators were inside of this report. I know all of you have had an opportunity to see it. We're going to talk way out here tonight, and then there will be opportunities for us to talk at a much more granular level about some of the recommendations that came out of this review. I want to share that summary of our priorities for action for you and sort of a roadmap of how do we prioritize future work related to any of the recommendations that the school district wants to undertake. When we first started, Dr. Vonderhaar reached out and said, hey, could we have a conversation around what does a review process look like? So when we talk with school districts, we want to help them understand sort of the range of needs of students in the school district, who's here, who goes to school in District 57. We want to understand the degree to which your advanced learner needs are already being addressed. So what's already happening here? What's the good work that's already going on? We want to assure that the district is engaged in equitable policies, practices, and services. Your leadership was very transparent with us and shared your equity audit from last year, so that was something that we could look at and understand as we started this process, that this work came before this work that we're doing here. How do we understand your stakeholder values and priorities for education related to your advanced learners? How do we adjust programs and services as needed in order to align with both evidence-based practices and your stakeholder priorities? Both of those components are extremely important in a review process. We want to sort of set those benchmarks for continued improvements and growth, and then we also want to be really mindful of the work that's already happening here and align recommendations to your strategic plan that's already in place. So that's where the work begins. We did conduct a meeting or convene a meeting with your D57 leaders to understand your specific needs and goals. We took the time to implement stakeholder surveys. So if you're here and you participated in the survey process, thank you very much. That's really, really valuable information for us. We conducted surveys for students, for families, for educators, and for your administration. Based on those surveys, we pulled that first initial information. We sort of take a look to see what themes are emerging in those surveys, and if there are any places where we want to delve specifically, and that's what creates sort of our bank of questions that we use when we conduct our focus groups. It gives us an opportunity to be in front of your stakeholders and listen to what they have to say related to practices in the district and what happened in the survey. And just right now in this moment, I just want to take a second to say thank you to both your leadership here in the district and to every one of your stakeholder groups. This district has been incredible to work with. Kristen has been an incredible leader in this process to make sure that everything was transparent, everything was organized. There are a lot of moving parts, as you can imagine, and it was done very, very smoothly. Your students were incredible to talk to and forthright. It was a joy to be inside your classrooms and see your teachers and your students engaging in learning. So it was a wonderful process for us to engage in as well. After those focus groups, we did have the opportunity as well to conduct several classroom observations. We did a complete data and policy review, so we looked at the way you have policies set up around your advanced learners. And then at the very end of that, we sort of synthesize all of this information that we've gathered, and then we make recommendations based on a range of needs, your goals, your resources, and your timelines. So hopefully that makes sense. Are there questions about this review process in general before we start talking a little bit about the reporting process? Great. So for those of you who've had a chance to take a look at the report, I do know that it's dense, and I do know that it's long and comprehensive. So what I have here is sort of that table of contents, and it sort of talks a little bit about how this report is organized. At the beginning is just sort of a background of the project and an overview of the process and the number of participants. And I do have a slide after this that sort of talks about the really robust participation that happened in your school district around this review. Then there is a summary of our findings. And so each one of our findings is related to a framework that I'm going to share with you in a moment that's based on NAGC programming standards. We don't make up the best practices. We lean on the best practices in the industry to create a framework around where our recommendations are created based on what we find out about your district. Once we get to the bottom of sort of those perceptions and the questions that we ask, we do have some community priorities for action, those big themes, those big places where we would recommend you taking a look at your practices. And then after that are recommendations that are directly related to each one of those 6 standards that are part of the NAGC framework. So your district engagement was really strong. We had 1,300 plus students who participated in surveys and 120 students who were tapped and participated in focus groups with us. 234 parents responded and 39 parents showed up to have conversations with us in focus groups. There were 148 responses from educators and 41 focus group participants that also included a separate meeting with your district administration and leadership. In terms of classroom observations, we were able to be inside 25 classrooms across multiple grade levels, both in your advanced courses and in your non-advanced courses here. So we use this framework that NAGC has created. Inside of each one of these standards, there are different subsets of skills and other standard pieces that come inside of learning and development. Standard 2 is assessment, curriculum planning and instruction, learning environments, programming, the way you're setting up your services for students, and then professional learning. So each one of these standards inside of the report will have recommendations directly related to the layers and pieces inside of each one of those standards. So our general findings, when we took a look at everything that we gathered, we realized that Mount Prospect is certainly an overall high-achieving school district. When we look at your students as cohorts, they are higher achieving than average when we look at an average cohort across the nation, both on MAP and on IAR. But what we also notice as we look at your district, your students are demonstrating average or better growth in reading and in math on IAR. So your students are growing and responding to the instruction that's happening here. We do believe that you are finding the right students to serve in your advanced learning programs and that the overall impact of your instruction is having a positive effect on students because we see that in your growth. We did find that there's a noted gap in performance between your low-income students and their non-low-income peers that grows over time in the district, and I have a data slide that will show that to you at the end, but that's also included inside of the report. Related to advanced learners, the district has a really robust continuum of programming that runs from 3rd through 8th grade with multiple levels of intervention at each grade level. So there is a horizontal continuum and a vertical continuum of service that already exists here. Mount Prospect uses a blend of classroom differentiation, specific and targeted enrichment, and then programmed acceleration to serve your advanced learners in math and ELA currently. And then the range of learning needs that we found for your students that are in K2 are similar to those in grade 8. So we looked at your range of needs where you have advanced learner programs, and we looked at those grade levels where you don't have advanced learner programs that are specific to that, and the range of needs looks really similar from K1 and 2, very similar to the way it looks in 3rd through 8th grade. And then your current service models may be missing some students that exist inside of your special populations like EL, those students who are low SES, and then students who have IEPs. And I also have a data slide at the end of this presentation too that takes a look at the overall volume of students in each one of these subgroups, and then the volume of students that have been identified for your advanced learner programs. And we'll take a look at that as well. We know that equity is on the mind of the school board in this community. Questions before we talk about priorities for action? That's good. Okay, great. So our big themes are the places where we felt like we wanted to really dig in and make some recommendations. And I want to take this moment to say that recommendations are exactly that. They're not a dictation as to what should happen in your school district. They are places for further investigation. We want recommendations to be valuable to your staff and your students, and we want to encourage you to do further investigation around what are the logistics of adopting one of our recommendations and making that happen in action in our school district. What are the costs of that? What are the ramifications of that? What do we need to do in terms of staffing? All of those things have an impact when we adopt a recommendation. So I know that Dr. von der Haar is going to conduct a task force, I guess, if you will, over the course of this year to take a look at some of those recommendations, but we want to make sure that we know that recommendations are not dictations for the school district. So our first priority for action is around communicating advanced learning services to your stakeholders. We know that you are compliant in having all of your information about your advanced learning programs on your website, but your parents are not accessing that and don't understand what services are available, what is our timeline for identification for services who would qualify for that, what does the service entail, what's the alignment of that service, if they're in, how long are they in, does it matriculate to the next level. Parents were just really unsure about what services are available when they begin and how their students will qualify for that. So as you look through recommendations in Standard 1, you'll see that we address sort of ways to go about communicating with your stakeholders, how to get that information in front of them, how to empower your staff to be the first level of conversation with parents around advanced learning services. We want to empower our teachers to be able to have those conversations with families when they ask. And that's also directly related to your strategic plan goal 3B. Our second priority for action is around expanding the continuum of services. We know that you already have a continuum of service in place. We're not necessarily saying add more, we're saying be mindful of who's included inside of that continuum, that there may be a need prior to 3rd grade in that continuum of services. We really want to encourage you to focus on the alignment of your Tier 1 instruction inside of your classrooms and thinking about enrichment and extensions around your core curriculum. An expanded Tier 2 service model that makes sure that we have all of the missing students that we believe may exist are able to access those Tier 2 programs, and then a more frequent use of acceleration. We're thinking about acceleration in relationship to a very intensive intervention, much like on the other end of MTSS. One of the recommendations you'll see related to this is sort of to adopt a model that's very similar to your MTSS process that you already engage in around problem solving for students, blurring the lines a little bit of qualification, finding the right profile of students who are going to qualify and benefit from your services. All of those types of things are addressed inside of this priority for action. The recommendations related to this will be found in Standards 2, 3, and 5. And this is directly related to your strategic goal plans 1A, B, C, D, and E. We also found some places where we would encourage you to look at your identification process and your acceleration criteria, thinking about how do we find students, How do we think about our standardized assessments that we do have in place? How do we look at other indicators of talent and readiness for our services that aren't necessarily standardized test scores? And how do we implement a process where we know we'll have a certain number of students that automatically qualify and those students who are close? How do we think about on-ramps for those students that currently don't have access to our programs? The recommendations that you'll find for this are in standards 2, 3, and 5 inside of the report, and this also is directly related to your strategic plan goals 1C, D, and E. And then professional learning opportunities for staff. We got a lot of feedback around what your staff would be interested in terms of both advanced learner pedagogy, and then also what does instruction look like in the classroom in terms of differentiation and grouping and understanding the data that we have to inform instruction. So thinking about professional learning opportunities, those recommendations will be found in standards 1, 2, and 6, and then that is directly related to your strategic plan goal 2C and 2B. Questions about these priorities and sort of where they came from? As you look at the report and you look at that first part of the report before you get to these priorities for action, you'll see a lot of reporting out about the data that we used to consolidate to come up with these priorities. Okay. Planning for 24-25, we're going to lean on Dr. Vonderhaar to sort of shepherd that and spearhead this. We at CTD are certainly happy to be part of that process if you care to engage with us that way, to sort of provide feedback, to talk through what all of those recommendations mean and what they look like in action as your stakeholders think about what do you want to put into place for next school year. This is one of the data slides that I referenced earlier. This is just a comparison of your overall district percentage of subgroups that you have here, and then what percentage of that same subgroup are identified and included in your advanced learner programs. So for students who are Black or African American, that's only 2% of your school district. You have about 0.5% of your advanced learner services that are Black students. So there's somewhat of an underrepresentation there. It's also important to point out that you have a very small Black population in your school district, so it makes a lot of sense that there would be a smaller Black population inside of your advanced learner systems. Best practice would say our advanced learner programs would look really similar to the overall demographics of our school district. You have 9% of students that are Hispanic here, and 5% of your students inside of your advanced learner programs are Hispanic. 8% are Asian, 9% are Asian inside of your programs. You have 5% that are 2 or more races, and 3.2% of those students are identified in your advanced learning services. 77% of your students are white, and 82%. There's a slight overrepresentation inside of your advanced learner programs. Where we start to have some concerns are in those other subgroups of EL, low income, and students who are IEP. Students who are identified as ELs are 10% of your current population, but we only have 0.75% of your advanced learners are also identified as ELs. So that's one of our recommendations. How do we find pathways and on-ramps to identify talent in this group of students so that they can also benefit from these advanced learner services? You have 6% low-income students. We see about 1.5% of those, the total population of your advanced learning programs are low-income, and 10% of your students have IEPs, and 3% of your programs have include students who have IEPs for whatever reason. Questions about those numbers? Of course, thanks.
Can you clarify, and I'm forgetting,
Of course.
I probably knew this, was this a compilation of multiple years data?
It was not.
It was a one.
It was one. It was 1 year.
Thank you for
Right, 1 year.
clarifying.
Right. Yeah, and so this snapshot gives us a first look, right?
Thank you.
So what we encourage school districts to do is this is a look we would want you to take every year over year just to ensure that there's equity inside of your advanced learner programs based on the demographics of your school district.
Thank you.
Yep, of course. And then the other data slide I have for you is something that we look at in all of our school districts. What you have here, it's kind of blown up big, but on the top are your students that are free and reduced lunch, and this is what their mean data looks like, both on MAP and on IAR on the top. And then the bottom boxes are your non-free and reduced lunch students, both in math and in reading. And what we see is in second grade, there's not much of a discrepancy between your kids who are free and reduced lunch and those who are. But as time goes on, achievement for your free and reduced lunch students tends to stall. Students who are not free and reduced lunch are making much more growth, and that gap tends to widen over time. That's something we like to have districts take a look at. There are some recommendations for early intervention in our recommendations for enrichment for all, early exposure to all of those rich and robust learning experiences that we know a lot of students who are on free and reduced lunch come to us without. They're underexposed and they don't have enough access to those things. So how do we put access and exposure inside of our classrooms for those students so that when we're ready to identify them for advanced learning programs, they're more ready for us to identify them with the levers that we use for that. All right. Questions? I'm pretty sure that's the end of my slide deck. So what questions do you have for me this evening?
I know Jen's dying to start, so go ahead.
I don't have to. I was waiting to see if there were others. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Of course.
And I appreciate you putting all of this together and for even taking this initiative on our end to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our students. I think my first question actually is about that slide around free and reduced lunch and those that are not. And I know you just mentioned like that there are interventions that we can put in place. And I think it was really interesting to see how close they were as they come in, right? And so even up until, second grade, they're able to at least start there, right? And so I guess I'm curious a little bit more about like what those interventions could look like and what are we thinking about as a district as we get started there?
Sure. So one of our recommendations that you'll see is sort of around an enrichment for all model, where we have deliberate systemic interventions for all students in early grades so that everyone's exposed to all of these really rich, robust learning experiences. And when we start taking standardized tests, it can, for really talented students, start to level that playing field. And so they look like they are less behind. It's something for our teachers to also be mindful of. If we don't look at it and we don't know it exists, it's really difficult for us to have a conversation about that. So who are these students? What's happening in the classroom for them? Are we exposing them to groups where we have high expectations? Are we asking them really rigorous questions? Are we expecting those kind of behaviors from them? Those are the places where we want to think about that in terms of our advanced learners, right? Coming at it from a lens and filter of more opportunity versus more intervention. Right? Yeah.
And from what I kind of gathered, it's like starting even back in like kindergarten or first grade, like starting there and then going up through.
Yeah, it would be. We know some kids come to us less advantaged. How do we close that gap as early as possible?
Right. Okay. I think some of these are more Christian question. I mean, anybody can talk about these, but I think my question on like the data itself and like what's coming back from this, how is that being shared with like the educators who were were observed in classrooms, like thinking about all the different pieces? I know we're talking about it right now, but what does it look like to share back with staff, or have we yet?
Sure. So of all of the classes that Melissa and her team observed, Melissa came and did presentations to those teachers after school or offered that ability to do that. So that has been super helpful in answering all of the questions. I think that it's helpful to have Melissa provide that overview and kind of that context, because as you were reading through the report, she added that additional piece. So that has kind of been our first step of that. Of course, we'll have this board meeting available to anyone who wants to see it. And then I think the next step is making sure that we communicate the report as well as some of those key findings, and then making sure that our staff know how to express interest in serving on this committee.
Yeah, that's helpful. I know this committee is kind of the next step as we think about like right now there's this need for communication, right? This want of communication and how people are identified and and I know you said like we're in compliance, it's on the website, you can find it. But we do have all these new communication platforms. It has been something that we've really been talking about. Like what are some of the things that we can already do to be able to communicate this even more?
Sure. So I think one of the key areas that came out from this report is that our staff need to be better informed about all of the different services, as well as how students can access this, how they are identified. So I think that's step one. We need to make sure that our staff are well informed. And then from there, one area that I want to refine, especially, is with our second grade students, and that is really when we start to identify students for services. They take a COGAT in February, one of the assessment tools. So I want to provide further explanation and refine our website a little bit more so it's easily accessible and understood of our current programming. And I know we've done some work with our middle school teachers specifically for math and just helping to create some visuals to better outline kind of how our math levels are and kind of the different books that we use and curriculum for that. So I think those are initial steps, but I do want to rely on our committee to identify what communication tools work best and how we can better communicate to our families as well as staff. But I think those are initial steps that we can take.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. Were you going to add something? You do look.
No, I just think that you're empowering your teachers to be that first conversation with families because they know those children better than anybody else in the school district is powerful. And then that way when parents have questions, there's a safe place to ask that question. Right. And we've built that capacity in our educators just to be that and help parents understand that. We want them to be able to identify who do I contact if I have questions about is my student an advanced learner and what are our programs here.
Yeah, that's helpful. Aside from this new committee, like who else is going to be looking at this report to like think about next steps? Because I'm sure it's not just them. Who else are you?
Great question. That's going to be one of our key focus groups, but we'll also share this with our district leadership team as we're looking at our academic data. I shared last year that we did fishbones to identify especially some of those discrepancies. So that group will be taking another look at this to identify some additional areas to explore.
And I know you mentioned DELT too. Are they going to see it too? Would that be another group that might look at it?
That is a group that may also look at it, yes.
Okay, I'm just curious. Because it's, I mean, I know that's where it originally came from. Like, I knew that it was kind of the...
Yes, so I think, I don't know if they'll do the entire thing because that would be a lot, but I think especially looking at some of that subgroup data will be really helpful for that group as well.
Yeah, I think about that slide that was just up there, the one that was, you know, kind of shows the difference between those groups. I think would just be an interesting one to look at.
Can I just interject to it?
Yeah.
I think in a district like yours that has a learning profile like yours with a lot of advanced learners, it's really important that all of our EL teachers and our special ed teachers and all of our stakeholders understand how to identify and see talent in students that may not be typically what we think about and typically what we look at. So where are those places where we can help everyone see our students in a way that help them look like advanced learners?
Yeah, that's helpful. So I think that dovetails with my next question around PD and PD for staff around like what has already happened around accelerated learning and I know this committee is forming and all the things, but are there things that you're thinking about even for this year in the PD that's coming? I know we've got this new ELA curriculum. I know we have all these things happening. Are there conversations after seeing this report that have shifted a little bit in PD?
Great question. So I think some of the things that we are currently already doing help to address some of the things that came up in the report. So Melissa talked about differentiation, so making sure that we're looking at our Tier 1 instruction that everyone is receiving. And we have done some work really looking at how to integrate what I call low floor, high ceiling, not just me, I guess research calls it that, low floor, high ceiling activities. And so that is making it so that all people have access to this activity. So for example, you might have number talks and there might be 4 numbers and then students have to figure out how they're connected. And so that allows anyone to access that. That also helps students who are advanced kind of think about it in multiple ways or identify multiple areas for that. So that is one area that I think aligns with our needs in supporting our students receiving special education, our students receiving multilingual services, as well as our advanced students. So that is one area. I know that we definitely need to do more work in really looking at kind of the differences in supporting our advanced learners and what additional things that we can put into place to really meet their needs. I will say that the teachers at Lincoln, for example, who have taught different levels, it kind of varies year to year. And I don't think we have done a great job at helping them have the tools to really identify what works best for the different populations. So that is something that, especially as we're looking at ELA, really thinking critically about some practices that we can put in place for them.
Yeah, I think one thing that stuck out to me in the report that wasn't talked about in the presentation, but was like that, I think it was like less than half of the students think that science and social studies are effective for students to reach their full potential. As a former social studies teacher, that like hurt me a little bit, and I keep thinking about like what does that acceleration look like, not only in ELA and math, and like what does it look like to give those rich experiences, kind of to your point, to everyone as we think about, what does it look like to have those rich experiences, to really give students that because those classes aren't tracked in any way. That's a great place to have that happen. And I think, I don't know what my question is, but I think that was where I was just like, oh, this could be a good place for PD for kind of all.
Yeah, we ask those questions because we do have really deliberate programs in place for ELA and math, but not in those 2 subjects. So it's important for us to know if perceptions differ, especially for our advanced students, between how well are ELA and mathematics meeting your needs, but what do you also then think about science and social studies? And when that percentage looks lower, we want to ask questions around, is your science and social studies as rigorous as your ELA and math classes, and if not, what would you like to see related to that? And then the other piece of that is how do we empower those teachers to be able to manage all that range of readiness inside of those classrooms without a deliberate advanced learner service there?
Thank you very much. I appreciate all of your answers. I am done.
Anybody else? Okay.
I have one question.
Okay, go ahead.
Just one question. First of all, thank you for the presentation. Very interesting stuff. One thing that caught my eye in the report, the full report, and maybe you could help me understand what this means. And I'll just briefly read it. It says, research demonstrates that students from underserved populations scoring in the top quartile on interim assessments generally perform as well as peers with higher scores in advanced and accelerated programming, but educators must be prepared to offer temporary, targeted, and front-loaded scaffolds, i.e. language support, specific skills teaching, additional background content. Can you just maybe explain what that means?
Yeah, so for example, if we have a student who is an EL learner, or we have a student who happens to be twice exceptional, they might have a specific learning disability in reading, but we believe that they have a lot of math talent. And our thresholds for qualifying for advanced learner programs, say in mathematics, are at the 90th percentile. But these students are performing in the 75th to 80th percentile. So they look discrepant because they're not meeting that standardized test threshold that we look for, but we see rapid growth or ability that doesn't show up on a test like that. Research does tell us that a student who is an EL, who's at the 80th percentile, has a pretty good chance of being successful in an advanced learner program, even though they haven't met that criteria. But we in the classroom may need to do some really deliberate diagnostic pre-assessment to see where their absolute readiness is. We might have to scaffold them at the beginning of an advanced learner experience because they've never been in that environment before, meaning might provide them some opportunities for graphic organizers. We need to build their vocabulary in front of that, ahead of that service, to help them be successful until they demonstrate they're ready to do it individually on their own.
That's great. Thank you. And I guess just to follow up, I guess I do have two questions.
That's okay. That's okay.
What I'm hearing sounds like that's putting a lot of pressure on the teachers now, right? And so how do we ensure, or are you concerned about the educators and staff needing to do all those things for this group of students while still ensuring that the rest of the students are not taken care of? That's bad language.
Right. No.
But you see does that make sense? Like, I'm just worried about the pressure on the staff of having to accommodate all of those now disparate needs and not just teaching the accelerated content.
Yeah, of course, we want to make sure that they are being mindful of all students' needs in the classroom, whether students need EL support, have IEP support, or if there are other social, emotional, or academic needs that exist in there. Our data will tell us the student looks really ready, but we don't know until they're in the classroom. And even in a selective enrollment environment, what we know as educators is that actual readiness for instruction can vary greatly even among a group of students who all met the same criteria to be included in the classroom. So we do want to empower our teachers to engage in really robust pre-assessment, really understand what their curriculum looks like and where kids are in relationship to their readiness for it. And that does require professional learning and support from administration and feedback during observations and all of those layers of things to support that professional practice so that we can set them up for success, as well as set our students up for success in that learning environment.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Go ahead, Vicki.
Thank you again. I'll get on the bandwagon. Thank you so much,
Thank
Melissa,
you.
for coming tonight and presenting to us. So I had two questions. One of the things that you pointed out was that there are certain populations who are underrepresented, you know, our EL students, low SES, students with IEPs, and you mentioned that it could be that our current service models are not capturing them or identifying them. And just curious, have you seen, and I know you pointed out here too that we do a great job, not saying anything, but have you seen in other districts maybe different methods or things that we're not doing that are being used successful maybe to identify students?
What we encourage schools to do, and identification for advanced learner services has gone through multiple changes over the last 25 years. For a long time, we thought that there was this one discrete set of traits that made a student gifted, and we all sort of served that for a little while. But now we're thinking about students through a lens of talent development, and how do we find their talents and how do we serve them? When we think about advanced math programs or advanced DLA programs, we want to ask ourselves the question, who would benefit from this service? Who's discrepant enough from what's happening in the regular classroom that they might need something different and more intensive to meet their learning needs? And so when we only use standardized test data, when we take two data points and we connect them together and we use a series of ands, we start to create exclusivity in that process. Because if a student has to meet 1, 2, 3, 4 criteria, the more criteria they have to meet to be included, the more exclusive the service tends to be. What we're encouraging schools to do is think about students, instead of meeting one set of criteria in a matrix of data, what would a profile of success look like for that student? What kind of traits do they need to exhibit? What do we need to recognize about this learner to ensure that they would likely be a good fit? We worked with a school district last year who had a terrible challenge with appeals from parents. They would have 25 appeals a year because their students weren't included in their advanced learner programs. 25 appeals from parents takes a really long time to address because there are a lot of different levels of further assessment and making sure that we made the right decision about that student. We asked them to embrace a profile approach where Students academically who are high achievers are probably a pretty good fit. Students who are really high in terms of their ability are also a pretty good fit. So they're yeses. They don't have to be ands, they're yeses. And then we have a student who's close to looking like they're ready academically. What else do we know about that student that would tell us that they could be a good fit for that? So we're blurring the edges just a little bit and thinking about students from a profile and a problem-solving lens versus they meet the criteria or they don't. This year, they included many students that would have been left out of their AND series last year. They had 0 appeals, and all the students so far this year are being really successful in the service. So that's just a way for us to look at it a little bit differently. We're not saying get rid of your criteria. We're saying how do we find other kids that could be a good fit that don't fit into the criteria that we have established. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, thank you. And my second question, so one of your recommendations, and maybe I'm pulling too far, is to kind of like broaden the continuum of services and just zoning in for our enrichment programs. Depending on the subject, it could start here in 3rd or 4th grade. And so again, maybe thinking about your work with other districts, I know, if we started in 2nd grade, it doesn't have to be a carbon copy of what's happening in 3rd and 4th, but are there other just really imaginative things that you've seen with younger kids in different districts?
Expanding services isn't necessarily taking your current model and moving it to an earlier grade level. It could be things like really helping our classroom teachers dive into Tier 1 enrichments and extensions that are related to our core curriculum. And so students who are close to being identified are getting really robust enrichment in their Tier 1 classroom without having to leave the room for a service. Students who are close, we also see schools implement sort of a growth to inclusion program where Melissa's in 3rd grade. She's really close to qualifying for this service, but she's not quite there yet. What if we have a goal over this next school year in Tier 1 that says we want to grow to this place where next year she's going to be more likely to be included in that service. So expansion is really more about thinking about how are we serving all kids through enrichment and or extensions and giving them opportunities to show their advanced learning, whether it's in a defined service or not. We want to continuum horizontally for all kids in our district to experience that. With that said, one of the recommendations is to think about an early enrichment for all model for your students in kindergarten through 2nd grade, because we do see the same volume of very advanced learners there that we do starting in 3rd grade through 8th.
I just had one additional question.
Sure.
In terms of just how we define the advanced learning services. I know we have some very formalized programs that are pull-out programs where kids, I think it's starting in 3rd grade for math, right? And then 4th grade for reading can go. Is that the definition of advanced learning services, or are we talking about something more comprehensive?
I feel like the semantics and the definition of that is probably something that your staff can grapple and wrestle with over the course of this next year. So what does our advanced learner identity look like in terms of our programs, and what do we call that? Every district has a different name for their advanced learning services. So it really is more of an internal lever and decision, like what do we call it, when do we start it, what does it look like? But once we decide that, communicating that to our stakeholders.
Sure, and I apologize, I should have clarified.
that's fine, sure.
I was speaking particularly with regard to the slide that talks about the percentage of general population, the percentage of people in the advanced learning services.
Yeah.
What programs are we talking about that we said only this percent of people, of students are in these programs?
Comprehensively, everyone in math 3rd through 8th grade and ELA 4th through 8th.
Okay, so we're talking about the more formalized pull-out. Because I
Correct.
know there's a bunch of different differentiation and different sort of paces of study that the teachers do incorporate now that potentially could be considered advanced learning or some kind of intervention, right? But it's not necessarily on the remedial end. It can be on the enrichment end too. Correct. So I wanted to know, are we, because to me, given the differentiation that we actually currently do, there's probably more students that are having their needs met by that model than are counted in this slide, is what I would imagine.
And I think that very much varies by grade level. So I know especially at the elementary level for different levels for math, we do some rearranging for different grade levels. Also, we have guided reading groups, so there's elements of differentiation within the classroom that we're doing really well. And then there's other areas like Melissa had mentioned, pre-assessment and using formative data and flexible grouping. So there are other areas that we can grow in for differentiation, but that's a valid point. I think this is specifically to those enrichment or accelerated reading and math.
Sure. And I would just, I guess as a suggestion maybe, certainly there's value in reviewing our processes and making sure that we're capturing all of the students that could benefit from a particular service, whether it's remedial or enrichment. But I wonder, and this I think was part of your report too, in terms of sort of making known to the stakeholder groups the availability of these services. I would think there's probably, particularly in, I would imagine the EL community, just as an example, a lot of sort of parental support that might be needed to help students be successful from those demographics, right? If parents don't have the time, the resources, the language skills themselves to be able to support a student in an enriched, advanced capacity, I think I would just want to see sort of that interaction and feedback. It's one thing certainly to identify a student within the school and say, this is what I think you could benefit from. But if there's not the level of support at home to really help, further that program, it's just something that I feel like should be factored in. Just my comment. Did anybody else have any questions or thoughts? Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I'm actually going to tell Dr. Bondahar she is going to go home. She had a dog of hers that was attacked. Did I two? So everyone keep her dogs in their prayers and thoughts. So she is going to go to her sick dogs. And we are wishing you well. And your dogs.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We'll move on then to our next staff superintendent report, total compensation packages.
Yes, so in the board packet, we have our annual documents where we are required by law to provide total compensation packages over $75,000, as well as administrator and teacher salary and benefits report. We're happy to answer any questions that you have about these items. Okay. No. And next, we have a first read of an intergovernmental agreement with Elk Grove Township. Sarah Tyberski, our Director of Student Services, is not here tonight, I don't think, but I'm happy to answer any questions the board may have about this item. I think this was maybe previewed in some capacity and when Sarah presented, I think, our SEL curriculum information maybe last month, and also the bullying report data. But we came to learn that Elk Grove Township offers these types of services and intergovernmental programming with schools, and we thought this would be a great resource for us to take advantage of. You can see a bit more about what services they have available through their certified mental health professionals. But similar to the concepts in the previous presentation with MTSS, where we really make sure that we have a Tier 1 approach for all students, and then as students' needs intensify, making sure that our level of responsiveness and interventions match the intensity of their needs. So this would be things like potential additional counseling, mental health support, and resources that would be used in conjunction with our District 57 mental health professionals. So we're happy to answer any questions. The board is not asked to take action tonight, but rather give feedback, and then pending the feedback and concerns and needs of the board, we could bring this back next month for action or change course based on the feedback or concerns.
Are there any thoughts about that? Okay.
All right, thank you.
Good.
Great. And last but not least, before we go into our FOIA reports for tonight, I just wanted to share that we've had 2 of our town hall meetings so far, and they've been well attended. We had one last week at Lincoln and one this week at Westbrook. We have 3 more on the books, but we are already talking about doing more. But the ones coming up will be in person on September 26th, next Thursday, I believe, at Westbrook School from 6:30 to 8, and then on Saturday, October 5th, from 10 to 11:30 at Lincoln. And we'll be sure to put more information about that on our website and communicate that to our families and community at large. And then we also are going to be offering a virtual informational session. Right now we have one scheduled for Monday, October 7th at noon. We thought sometimes it's easier for families and people on their lunch break to hop on a Zoom call and not have to get in your car, find childcare, do all the things that make sometimes going to evening or even weekend events difficult. And we're likely going to offer a couple more informational sessions, both in person and online, because they've so far, like I said, been well attended, and we're learning questions and community members' needs and concerns, and we're trying to make sure that we're proactively providing information at large. So thank you so much for that update, or for hearing it. And any questions about that so far? Okay. I just want to put a plug in for our District 57 website, where we have an entire page devoted to referendum 2024 information. You can find a tax calculator there. You can submit a question that you have about the referendum, and you will receive a response from the district. You can request a tour, which I was so thrilled to give a tour this week to a community member, and it was a great opportunity to showcase some of the states of our facilities, but also hear suggestions, comments, and feedback for us. And we're wanting to make sure that everyone from our community has the information they need to be able to make an informed decision by the voting day of November 5th. So with that, this month we're going to transition to a more abbreviated FOIA report, as we learned that we do more than we need to by qualifications of the Open Meetings Act. So District 57 received 7 FOIA requests between the dates of August 16th and September 18th, 2024. And we provided responses to each of these requests, and you can find a detailed report in your board packet that outlines each specific FOIA request. And that concludes the report.
Wonderful. Much more truncated than usual, and especially with 7 of them, we'd be
Picked a
here all
good
night. Okay, that brings us to the consent agenda. I understand Vicki did the bills. Everything looks good? Okay. In that case, if I will entertain at this time a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second?
Member Choke?
Yes.
Member Qualcheck?
Yes.
Member Leto?
Yes.
Member Nelson?
Yes.
Vice President Bennett Kill?
Yes.
Member Chung?
Yes.
President Fay.
Yes. Okay, that brings us to our unfinished business, where we will take action about the official fiscal year 24 budget. Again, we just held a public hearing about it. We've heard about several iterations of it. But we do have one final opportunity for discussion about it, if anyone is interested. Okay. With that, if I could have a motion to approve the official fiscal year 24 budget.
So moved.
Second.
Member Qualcheck?
Yes.
Member Leto?
Yes.
Member Nelson?
Yes.
Vice President Bennett Kill?
Yes.
Member Chung?
Yes.
Member Choke?
Yes.
President Fay.
Yes. Wonderful. We do have another opportunity at this time for community comments, if anyone would like to address the board.
Good evening. My name is Carol Strom, and I am the Vice President of the Mount Prospect Educational Support Professional Association. On behalf of our negotiations team and our membership, MPESPA would like to thank the Board of Education and District 57 administration for their support and efforts during our negotiations. Together, we worked hard to ensure an agreement was met that benefited our entire ESP staff. That common goal resulted in the contract being presented this evening. We look forward to providing continued educational excellence in District 57. Thank you.
Are there any further comments? Okay, well, that makes a really great segue into our new business, under which we will take action on the MPESPA agreement. If I can have a motion to approve the MPESPA agreement.
So moved.
Second.
Member Leto?
Yes.
Member Nelson?
Yes.
Vice President Bennett Kill?
Yes.
Member Chung?
Yes.
Member Choke?
Yes.
Member Qualcheck?
Yes.
President Fay?
Yes. Congratulations. Yay. And I guess just briefly, we'll do a picture. Just briefly, I should have said before we took action, myself and Member Leto had the privilege of serving on behalf of the district on that negotiation committee along with Dr. Gore and Dr. Kays and Karen. Yes, and Dan. Oh, and Dan, sorry. I thought you said Dan and Chris. I was like, I already said Chris. I know you forget him. I said Chris. But I just want to reiterate, the sentiments of Carol, what you said. It was a learning experience for everyone, and we had some really challenging conversations, but worked through it very well. And I'm really pleased with what we came out with. So at this time, we'll stand up and take a picture.
There you go.
Not okay. Next up in new business, we have our Press Plus update. This is the first read of our Press Plus issues 115 and 116. Eileen and I on the policy committee reviewed the new updates. And I don't think there were very many significant changes. Many of the updates were just updating citations, et cetera. But this is something that, we do regularly to make sure that our policies are up to date, particularly when the laws on which they are based have changed, right? We want to make sure that everything is in alignment. So are there any questions? Okay. Just a reminder, this is our first read, so we're taking a look at the new policies, making sure everything's sort of aligned with what we as a district are trying to do, and then we will take action and accept these changes at our next meeting. Okay. That brings us to board discussion. We have 2 items for board discussion today, and we'll begin, I think, with the conversation about the board governance committee. Corinne, did you want to say anything about that?
Sure. Last meeting or the meeting before, if I'm recalling correctly, we had just talked about tabling the community engagement committee, given all of the work that's being done with the referendum. I think we are engaged in the community at this point. So tabling that one and moving into one of the other proposed board committees of a governance committee. So in your packet, we included a charter proposal for a governance committee. And basically, for those who are unfamiliar, I'm going to read the purpose. So the government committee's purpose is to ensure that the Board of Education adheres to the highest standards of governance, maintaining transparency, accountability, and integrity in its operations and decision-making processes. The committee oversees board member recruitment and orientation, development and training, and board leadership succession planning in accordance with established policies and practices approved by the Board of Education. So really, it's a group that is making concrete some of the informal things that we do, so that we can continue to move our board forward with consistency and with consistency. That was it. Does anybody have any questions about it?
Chris?
Well, first of all, a comment, which is I think this is awesome that you put this together and thought it and really pushed it through. I was disappointed not to see the committee on committees charter, but I thought that was coming at some point. But
Never
I like
can
this.
live that one down.
I love almost everything on here in terms of the duties and responsibilities. I'm a little not crazy about the board recruitment part, specifically the establishing criteria for board member qualifications. I don't think that's our place to do that. The state of Illinois has identified the only qualifications that should matter, and it's really up to the community to decide who should be on the board. So I would propose we eliminate that from the charter.
I agree, because there's specifically, you have to be a
Yeah,
registered
there's-
voter, you have to live here for a year in the boundaries, so, like you said, I mean, what kind of qualifications, we couldn't make
Right,
that
it's
stick.
not really our, now, I will say, I think we would all agree there are certain things that would make you a better board member once you're on the board,
Right.
right? So I think that is something that we absolutely should be part of this, I think. And you've listed a lot of that here, the professional development and all that stuff. I'm totally in favor of that, but I would maybe just strike.
Well, the potential maybe would be with an appointment, an appointee versus somebody who's elected on. That might be something to look at. But really, I mean, that's the only differentiation I could
Sure.
potentially see.
I appreciate you raising that. I didn't read it that way, because I think in talking about what this could look like, one of the things that I had considered was establishing criteria or qualifications, perhaps, not for board members, right, because those things are governed by law, but for the executive positions. And, it could be a conversation about, should there be criteria and qualifications that indicate whether someone is a good fit for a VP or a president type of role? And if so, then what do those things look like? And, it could look like a certain number of years of experience on the board, a certain level of training as far as different, IASB seminars, et cetera, things like that. So I didn't read it quite as literally as you all did, but I appreciate the distinction. I think I thought of that as establishing criteria for the executive position.
Well, I think if that sub letter A was under succession planning, that might make more sense. Right?
Okay.
Or under board member development.
Or under board member development,
Yeah.
sure.
It's one of those two.
Okay, and I appreciate you clarifying that, because that I think is a good idea.
Okay.
And the only other thing, explain maybe what you had in mind for succession planning. I mean, in my company, we do succession planning 10 years out for different key positions, right? I assume we're not talking about that. I mean, is this?
No, I think I'll speak to my understanding of it. And this is something that Corinne and I have been working on in the time that we've been in these roles. And maybe succession plan isn't quite the right word for it, but the idea of the board president role is that the person in that seat should be able to do everything that the president does and can do when the president's not present.
Yes.
And even for myself in coming into the presidency role, I had the best example. Right? I watched Eileen in this role for a number of years, and so understood sort of from a distance what the role involved. But once you're here, it becomes very different. And even, right, now that we're in this place of referendum and we've had contract negotiations, those were things that I didn't necessarily see Eileen do, that I've sort of had to figure out, right? So succession planning may not be the right terminology, but I thought of it in terms of, or I understood the concept in terms of specific training, coaching, mentoring, maybe perhaps, for those executive roles. Like what are the expectations? What can you do? What can't you do? And then similarly for the VP, right? If the expectation is that that person has to be able to sit in this seat when I can't, or when the president can't.
Got it.
Well, then that person has to know what the expectations of the presidency are also. So hopefully that clarifies.
Okay, and so for the second time, again, I love the way you described it just now. That I think is really important. When I read this, I thought what this meant is that this committee is going to literally say, this is our president and vice president for the next 5 years, and that's our plan. Okay.
Sure. No.
Maybe I'm too used to succession planning.
Not necessarily, right? But it's something to consider. Not in terms of like identifying, right? But making the concept of the roles more transparent, accessible, and sort of bolstering interest among the board. There were very few contestants when it came to taking on the seats.
There were none a while ago.
And it's possible that could be, right, maybe a misunderstanding of what it involves. I won't deny it's a lot of work, right? But so that's something to consider. We definitely don't want to be in a place where there's 7 of us here and nobody is eligible or interested in being president or vice president. So
I do like. Oh, I'm sorry, Ken. Go ahead. I do like the idea. Just last thing I'll say of kind of that, right, where maybe there's identifying this is what the president and vice president do, and then hey, if you're interested in doing this as a board member, this is maybe some training, mentoring, learning from Corinne, and saying, hey, I'm interested in this. And then maybe those folks who show that interest, those would be good candidates to fill those roles.
Sure.
As opposed to someone who showed no interest in that and then suddenly says, I want to be president. Right.
Right. Corinne, I'll let you speak to it a little bit further, and then Pam, you can take your question.
Yeah, that's really the intent. And just, again, I said this the last time we did a committee proposal. This is just that, it's a proposal. And I think one of the first things that the governance committee will do is clarify this so it meets our needs. This is one person's idea and understanding of certain things. So this is not something that is set in stone. And definitely, I think that feedback and that work of the committee will be really to make this something that is important for our board and for keeping our board culture moving in a positive direction.
I do applaud you. It is always hardest to be the one to put something on paper the first time. It's easy for me to sit here and say, well, I would maybe change that and that. So I really do applaud you and appreciate you doing this. So thank you.
I think the other thing around this that we had wanted to talk, oh, sorry, Pam, you had something, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that training and explanations are the way to go, what Chris was working on. Right now, on another board, nonprofit board that I'm sitting on, we not amended, what was the word she used? We extended the board presidency. The board presidency was supposed to be for 5 years and no one else. It's a very small board, 5 people on the board. No one else wanted anything to do with it. But also, it's not really, there hasn't been explanation or training. So we have new board members coming in, and they don't have the experience or training to be president. They asked me if I wanted to be president, and I said no.
I got enough going on.
Yeah. But I think that there has to be an understanding, and I'm not really sure how we would do it. We're not, it's the Library Foundation Board. So it's not a public board. But I think, I don't know how we would do the training, or it would have to be meetings, somebody would have to show interest. The board president couldn't kidnap you and say, okay, you're sitting in a room and I'm going to tell you how to do this. We're very lucky. We have a wonderful board president, and we're so glad that we extended her. She's just absolutely wonderful.
No, that's a good point, and that would certainly be the role of the committee, right, to figure out the best way to put that information together. I think the other thing that we wanted to talk about around this was in terms of membership. So in dissolving the idea of the community outreach committee, we had a number of members who were interested in participating. I don't know that I wanted to assume necessarily that the same cohort would be interested this time. So I guess if everybody's okay with it, we'll just kind of drop names in the hat again and pull and go about it that way. Okay. So then if you wouldn't mind, send me an email, let me know you're interested in this committee, and I'll make selections. It's already Thursday. I'll make selections early next week. Does that make sense? No. Yeah.
I just want to say thank you. This is a great idea. You guys are doing a fabulous job. Love it. When you step down, you do a lot less.
Speaking from experience, she says. Was there anything else around that I missed? No. Okay. We'll move on then to our next item of conversation, which is the national conference proposal. And I'll let Jen and Corinne sort of take the lead on discussing the content there, but I do want to just give a little bit of shape to the conversation. So if you've read the materials that were provided, the idea is that Jen and Corinne are interested in submitting a proposal to the COSBA National School Board Conference and representing District 57 in that capacity. And there's sort of 2 levels to that conversation. There's a lot of questions around, our board policy provides for board members to access programs like the one, conferences like the one that we'll be discussing. For instance, we go to the IASB conference every year to access training and board member development. And that's part of our board policy. That's certainly something that's needed and helpful for us as board members. But we don't have a lot of guidance within that policy about board members presenting at conferences. There's not a lot of guidance about which conferences or the why for a particular conference. So there's sort of a lot of question marks to be considered. And that's my preface, but I'll, Jen or Corinne, if you want to sort of talk about the proposal itself and the motivation and.
Well, as Jen has given me the eye, I guess I will do it. So this actually came out of a conversation that Jen and I were having about the unique inflection point that we are in at a district. As a district, it was the idea of sharing and receiving feedback from other school boards, whether local or nationally, well, in this case, nationally, about this place of transition between having the relatively young board, new superintendent, strategic plan, portrait of a graduate, like referendum, like all of these things happening in such a condensed time period, and where we are, how we've been managing it, what has been successful, what hasn't been, and then gaining feedback from others about, like concrete feedback about others who have either been through that or are in that process as well. The conference itself is the national conference is for it's Consortium of State School Board Associations, so COSBA. And this is an organization that was founded in 2001, 2002. The state of Illinois, ISB, is one of the founding members of the national organization and was put together after after the services for the National Association of School Boards no longer met the needs of school boards, some of the school boards that were participating. So there is a history of a strong Illinois presence in COSBA and in leadership. Several of the executive positions either are or have been filled by Illinois or IASB representatives, former IASB executives as well. One of the reasons why we are bringing this to you as well, between the not only what we feel like we can provide and get out of it as with regards to where we are as a board, but also it does have a dollar amount, a dollar cost for us to attend. And we did include a estimated total cost at the bottom of the document that's in your packet of about $2,400 for the two of us to attend, all inclusive. And again, airfare is subject to change. There are all kinds of variables that might change or be different. But generally speaking, from the information that we have today, that's about the total cost of attendance. But also, one of the other things that we think would be really valuable in attending is also the networking of the national conference and bringing back information and connections that are going to help support our board and support Mary in her work. One of the things that can be done is have some really targeted attendance at presentations so that we are really bringing back information that is pertinent to what we're doing and where we are, and that would be something that we would be able to coordinate and talk about, just so it's not a, hey, I want to go do this thing, but rather having some more like targeted information that we want to bring back. So Jen, do you have anything you wanted to share?
I think the only addition that I would make is just the to put in for to present is due at the end of this month. And the only way we would go is if we were chosen to present. So this is not even like, this is kind of one of those where we're putting it out there as a potential. And then we would put in to present. And if we got, then that's when we would actually go. If we were not chosen to present, one of the big pieces is really this idea of like, how do we do strategic storytelling? How do we elevate our district? But then also to Corinne's point a little bit ago, of like getting that feedback. I've attended multiple like national conferences in the role that I sit in my day-to-day job. And I think that is something that we have found to be super helpful, is like hearing from people in California who are doing some really interesting work, or in, North Carolina, or in, wherever, like all the different places across the country. And our work has really shifted and changed of how we do things. And I think that's what I'm hoping here. And, and the thought would be like, if we go and it's a not a great thing, like, then we'd come back and say that, right? But if it is, like, this could be something that we could continue to think about of this board development and thinking about that and what that really means to develop a board well.
Does anybody have any questions about Pam?
I don't have a question, I have a comment. I think this is really great. I think it's not only great for what we can get out of it from others, but Illinois is one of the states now that is very strong in education. And when you go, I know that you will present a forceful and articulate piece of strength that recognizes how important public education is. It's very, very, very important. Education is the strongest infrastructure that a country has, that a state has, that a city or a village has. And I know that when you go, you will be talking on high-level items, and that you will be strong and you will be presenting the best that education offers. For that, not even for what we get back, but for what you're giving to the country is so very, very important at this critical point in time. So I make a motion that you go.
We're not there just yet. Chris, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say I'm all for it. I think it's great. And I hope you guys get picked. So, if there's someone you want us to lobby, let us know.
Send letters.
You both will have a lot to offer to anyone down there. That would be great, and you'll have a lot to bring back. I know you two, and we'll be hearing a lot of it. So I'm all for it too, and good luck.
Yeah, I agree. Best of luck. I hope you get picked, and I think, and actually, it's great that we're talking about this right after that discussion about board development. I think this fits in perfectly with that. So yes.
Okay. I'll just share my thoughts because I think there's maybe a couple factors to the proposal that we haven't had the chance to talk about. Certainly, the fact that you and Jen took the initiative to put out a proposal, and again, right, we don't know if it's going to be accepted. Certainly, we would be hopeful that that would be the case. It opens up some questions about this particular conference, the fact that we as a board have never attended before, not that that's a reason in and of itself not to attend now. But I guess I want to be clear about the direction of the board, understanding that there's a cost involved beyond what we would typically spend on board development. And again, you all are taking the initiative to sort of put the district out there, which I think is to be commended. Is the understanding then from the remainder of the board that, Jen and Corinne are taking this step on behalf of the board to propose this, or to make this proposal in the event that it's accepted, we'd be funding the two of them and not anybody else? Is that the understanding? Okay.
That was clear.
Okay. I'm glad it was clear. I don't know that we had really discussed it in terms of, and this gets to the point that I was trying to make about, our policy isn't very detailed in terms of board development, right? So certainly you all would benefit individually and as board members from this opportunity, and I have every confidence that you would bring back your learning, your feedback, and the experience of the conference as a whole. But there's nothing in our policy that covers this type of a situation, right? So if we all have a clear understanding, then I don't really have anything else to say about
It
it.
does make, oh, I'm sorry, Pam. Go ahead.
So just so I understand what you're saying, so you're saying that there might be someone on here that would want to go to the conference too? Is that what you were suggesting?
Well, I'm thinking in terms of, the only framework that we have right now for board development is the III conference in November, which is generally held in Chicago. It's almost always held in Chicago. So it's local, accessible to people who, want to stay downtown overnight or not. And that is something that the district funds for all board members. So in thinking about attending a different conference or a new conference, I started from the baseline that the opportunity would be open to everyone. You don't think so? Go ahead, Vicki.
I think, and my interpretation of one of the points that you're making is that this is not setting a precedent for others to say, oh, I guess, Jen and Corinne can go there. That means I can go here. So I don't think so. And I think, both of you kind of alluded, if it's not a good experience or if it's not, what you thought it was, you'll just come back and report that and that's fine. So, so I don't think we're assuming that this sets us on a different path, which I think is what you're saying.
Plus, you can also put in policy, like, when you're doing something like this, where we want to make a presentation, we want to be a part of it, that's a reason that we would allow to go, and it'd be the participants for that presentation only. And maybe you make it every other year, or, you know what I mean? You can get more specific, after they get picked and go.
Okay, all right.
And I just want to add that Jen and Corinne's done presentations. Jen's done a lot of presentations. I look to Jen as being a subject expert on this board. She's awesome and she's just amazing. And I want people to hear her. I want people in, especially Georgia and some of these other states, I want people to know what we value as a country in public education.
Understood. Were you going to say something, Chris?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if, not that we need more board policies, but, and maybe this is something the governance committee can think of, should we
Exactly.
set an annual budget for board development and make a policy around that so that we're transparent about it?
Potentially. Yeah.
I think that wouldn't,
And again,
it could be reviewed every year.
Right, and I just bring the question because we don't have the context for it. It's not my intention at all to diminish any one of us who wants to pursue an opportunity like this. It's really just a matter of, I wanted to be clear about what the actual cost would be. It's a much different thing for the two of you to go as compared to the whole board, let's go to Georgia.
Yes.
So I'm glad that wasn't an expectation for anybody. At the same time, if there was interest, right, I think that's something we would want to try to accommodate, and we just don't have the framework right now for that. And so the two conversations dovetail really well.
Yeah, and having some guardrails around it would mean that, hey, if we've already done, 6 things, somebody wants to do something else, well, we've set this amount aside for this, and can't do it this year, right? And it's at least a fair way to adjudicate that than just saying, well, no, I think we've already done enough of this for 1 year.
Right. And in truth, it's a good problem to have, right?
Yeah.
And the policy doesn't reflect it because we haven't had this problem, right?
Yes.
So, Pam?
In library land, when we do our budgets, we set aside staff development. And so there's a certain amount of money to go to ILA and a certain amount of money to go to ALA. And the same, it's not the same people who go every year, except for the executive director. That person is expected to go every year. You don't really have a choice of not going. ILA is a little bit different. You're not in that position where you're expected to go. But staff are funded to go because it's recognized that is a place of learning the trends and learning what is going on nationally. It's sharing of ideas. Staff development is very, very, very important when you're working with the public or when you're in an educational field.
Sure.
So Jen and Corin, go this year. If I wanted to go next year without any subject expertise, I hope you would sit me down and say, well, Pam, let's talk about this.
Fair enough. Corinne, did you want to add something?
No, the only thing that I wanted to add was follow up to what Chris was saying. Like this is what I see as the work of the governance committee. Like it's this kind of thing, and it was really, I don't know, fortuitous, but interesting that they both came together at the same time, because when we were putting this together, it was like, oh, right, should we talk to somebody about this? Oh, right. Has anybody done this before? Like there just was not, we're starting from scratch. So I If the rest of the board decides to let us submit this proposal, that would be awesome, and then see where things lie at that point. But
Okay. Well, I think we established both things, didn't we, Eileen?
Yeah.
What were you going to say? You had
I was just going to add, you can always reach out to your board president group, because I know they have been to
That's
these
true. That's true.
events.
Yes, I understand. I was trying to give a context to the conversation, but given the overwhelming support, I think by all means go ahead and submit the proposal, and we'll cross our fingers and hope for a successful outcome. Pam?
Let's make a motion so that it's, I mean, because we're expending money, right? So we should make it, no?
I don't think
We're not
we
right
can.
now.
It's not on the agenda, right?
We're not
Oh, okay.
spending
Oh,
money
see,
right now.
Oh, okay. So I see what you're saying, because they haven't been,
Right.
the proposal hasn't been
Right.
accepted.
So admittedly, the conversation's a little premature, but because we don't have a framework for sort of who does what, or, who does what at what conferences. So that was why we brought it together today. So if there's something further on that,
When will you guys hear back?
I think it was like maybe in November, maybe, like, I think it doesn't take them too long. I have a couple of proposals going in, and I can't remember which one's which, so I think it's November.
Because I saw the attendance fee jacks up like $300 at some point. Hopefully
Yeah,
before,
so
after the,
If you get, and this is, I think, an important point, if you are accepted into to presenting, it doesn't change.
okay.
And if you are, you do get a slight discount. It's not huge, as we put in there, is $50 off, but it does stay that regardless of what happens, because I'm sure there's sometimes they have to do a second round of presenters and those kinds of things that happen in a conference. So to your point, it does stay that.
okay. All right. Well, that brings us then to the end of our agenda. We have no need for closed session, at least not another one. How are we doing on sparkling water?
Yeah, actually, I'm almost at the end.
Okay, perfect timing, perfect timing.
No, I think I just timed it that way, so I'd be done at the end.
So you could ration your La Croix if you wanted to. Okay. In that case, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. Member Nelson?
Yes.
Vice President Bennett Kill?
yes.
Member Chung?
Yes.
Member Cho?
Yes.
Member Qualcheck?
Yes.
Member Leto?
Yes.
President Fay?
Yes. Thank you very much.